Nico Agritelley, it's great to have you on the show. Fellow Americans, us who have this deep passion for El Padel. Tell us, in your own words, Nico, who are you?
My name's Nico Agritelley. I'm born and raised in Dallas, Texas. I've lived here my entire life. I went to college, played college tennis in Texas. So I've never lived anywhere outside of Texas. Played tennis since I was 3 years old, graduated college, and then the year I graduated college was so burnt out from tennis, decided to start trying playing paddle. Year I graduated is the year we built 3 courts at my tennis club. So for me, it was perfect because I was able to transition to a racket sport that was very similar to tennis. I was able to learn a new skill. I was able to get better at something, and I was able to compete. So for me, it was just first time I played, I instantly fell in love. And then I decided to quit my day job in May of 2022 to do paddle full time. Right out of college, I worked in finance for 5 years, and it got to a point where uh, paddle was starting to overtake my job. So I was having to take unpaid time off, really like plan out my year because I only had 10 days of paid time off per year. So then we went to Qatar in the end of 21 for the World Championships. Had to take 4 days of unpaid time off, which was for me was great. I went there, got to represent my country, got to play against some of the top guys in the world. Uh, Absolute blast. And then I came back, and then the next year, my boss said, "Hey, no more unpaid time off." And I was like, "Okay." So then I decided to take kind of a leap of faith and quit my day job to do paddle full time, and it was the best decision I ever made in my entire life.
Love it. It must have been quite a challenging decision. I mean, it's all the same. You got the security of a salary, a place you've been there for 5 years, and this new thing, paddle tennis. And I suppose pretty much everybody, including your parents, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it was I was playing tournaments at that time, and I wasn't doing it like full time, but it definitely was scary in some sense. Not knowing like how I'm gonna train, where I'm gonna go, what tournaments am I gonna be able to even like survive. So I do teach to help supplement some income. But both my partner Luis and I are getting to a point now where sponsorships and prize money are actually starting to help keep us afloat. I still do teach whenever I'm in town. I'm not in town very often though. I think last year we traveled like 32 weekends out of the whole year. It was crazy, but it was a blast. We had a ton of fun, and this year is going to be similar. It's going to be just back to back to back to back. We were in Miami for 2 weeks for the Pro Paddle League. I looked at my schedule yesterday or 2 days ago. I think my next free weekend is June 22nd. So it's about to go into crazy season.
Wow. Well, for us over in Europe, I spent so much of my life in Spain, so I've had long history with it. And let's say it's more common to be able to talk to somebody at a dinner table and say, "Oh, I play paddle. Oh, I've heard about that." Now it's sort of becoming trendy. In the States, it seems it's still pickle and platform tennis and tennis and this other thing, padel, which has to be spelled pronounced differently. How does one organize the professional side of it? In other words, with the sponsorship, the majors or the tournaments, is there enough within the US in terms of tournaments, or do you have to pretty much consider going out and doing Mexico and Europe and so on?
Um, Tournament wise, there's enough. There's enough stuff for me to stay busy, compete 2 or 3 or 4 weekends per month. The roadblock that Luis and I run into is that we've been number one in the US maybe for 6 months, maybe over 6 months. But there's really only one other team here in the US that's giving us kind of a true challenge. So that's good. That means that we're improving. But now, because we're kind of hitting that upper tier, it's tough for us to get the competition that we need to improve. So we spent a month in Spain in January training. We trained with Seba Neroni in the morning. We go to the gym, and then he would help set us up a match in the afternoon. And for us, that was invaluable. It was amazing. We got to play with guys top 50 in the world, top 70 in the world. So that's what we need in order to get better. The downside is we just don't have that level here in the US. Um, So it's kind of a catch-22, and our sponsors want us to grow paddle here in the US. I totally understand. Everybody says it's a huge market, which it is. It's going to blow up. It's already on that uptick of starting to really get there. So for us, they want us here in the US competing, growing the brand here. Totally understand again. But for us to grow as paddle players, we need to find places outside of the US to play. Maybe we go to Mexico. Going to Spain was amazing. But if we're in those other countries, then we're not growing paddle in the US. So it's kind of that balancing act, that catch-22 of how do we improve, but then also how do we kind of make our sponsors happy and grow paddle in the US. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now. But tournament wise, prize money wise, the US is starting to really, really catch up. We have a circuit called Red Paddle, which is very similar to UTR if you're familiar with tennis. It's a
Yeah.
rating system, and they have a circuit they created 2 years ago. Pretty decent prize money, 5,000, 10,000, $25,000 prize money tournaments. So we try to play as many of those as possible. Their rating necessarily doesn't really matter ranking wise, at
For
least for
fit
the
or anything.
US.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I see.
exactly. So the other circuit we play is called USPA, United States Paddle Association. That's where we're ranked #1 in the US. And that's what qualifies us for like the world championships and stuff like that to get selected for the team. So we play both. We play the USPA and we play the Red Paddle tournaments. And the USPA is starting to have more and more prize money at some of the higher level tournaments.
Loving that. I want to talk to you about your transition from tennis to paddle, because that's the majority of people come to paddle from lawn tennis. And it was a fascinating conversation with Luis. And I was wondering how you transition. I mean, let's put it this way. Most tennis players try to avoid the wall, and they're usually very good at the net. But what about you? How is your transition from tennis? Because you're taller than Luis, as I understand it.
Yep.
And so I imagine you have a sort of a more of a netty presence and more of a serve and all that overhead. But yeah, talk us through how you transition and what is the key to beginning to be a real paddle player.
I kind of have a funny story with transitioning from playing tennis to paddle. So for the first 2 years of me playing paddle, I wasn't actually playing paddle. I was playing tennis on the paddle court. I've never taken a paddle lesson in my entire life. So again, for the first 2 years, we would just go out there, like some of the teaching pros at T-Bar or somebody's, and I would go out there and we play, and we have a blast though. We have so much fun. We play for 2.5, 3 hours. But again, it's minimal walls. We're not really using the walls. We're not really hitting a proper bandeja. Everything that's going above the head as an aerial shot, we're going for a big smash. It wasn't until 2 years in, we did a club versus club event. So we did a T-Bar versus a club in the Houston old club called the Grand. So we went down there and we played against them. And me and whoever I played with, we lost to two 15-year-olds. And for me, that was just like a blow to the chest. It was like, what the heck? Because this would never happen in tennis. I don't care how
Right.
good those 15-year-olds are.
Yeah.
Like me as a 23-year-old is not losing to 15-year-olds. But they saw that we were tennis players and they saw we had no walls. We had no idea how to play the sport. So they would just stay back and hit lobs and hit lobs and hit lobs and wait until we hit one that we didn't clear. They come up and they end the point and so it wasn't until after that I was like, holy cow, okay, if I like want to start playing this sport, I got to learn how to play properly. So from there, then I would just grab teaching pros or my brother, and we go out there and we practice letting it go off the wall. But again, I'd never taken a lesson, so I didn't have anybody to feed me balls and tell me do this, do that, you're doing this, so on and so forth. So everything that I've learned is self-taught, which is kind of cool. But on the flip side, had I had a teaching pro from day one, I feel like where I am now, maybe I could be 2 or 3 times higher because I would have been that much more experienced, like actually playing paddle.
Mm.
So my advice to people looking to get into the sport that want to learn how to play is like, look, even if the lesson's a little expensive, take 2 or 3 or 4 lessons, learn how to use the walls, learn how to hit a bandeja, learn how to actually play paddle because your skill sets from tennis will transfer over very well to paddle. but there are subtle differences between tennis and paddle. So if you can learn those early on, get the proper technique, it's going to make the transition and the learning curve even that much easier.
Totally. I mean, the 15-year-olds, they showed the way. And you know, it's amazing that, you know, even for me, I can be up against a 35-year-old ATP tennis player and still muck around with them,
Hmm.
double their age. And you know, you put the chiquitas in, you keep on lobbing them nicely. You know where to put it up on their high backhand. You're sort of strategically aware, whereas
Hmm.
their positioning in the court isn't quite there. What about your side of play now? You've been now playing for 7 years.
Hmm.
How would you characterize your side of play? What sort of animal are you on a court?
Um, the last year when I was in the Arkansas Matrix, one of the guys in the team, Charlie Moon, gave me the nickname American Eagle. Um, so when I first started off playing, I actually started playing on the left side. So I
Hmm.
played on the left side for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Then, right before we went to Qatar in 2021, we were assembling the team, and I asked the coach, I go, "Look, I'll play whatever side you want, right side, left side, both sides. You tell me." He said, "We're going to put you on the right side for the tournament." Excuse me. So I started training on the right side right before that. So that was Qatar for 21, and then started beginning of 22 is when Luis and I started playing. And Luis had no idea how to play on the right side, so he plopped himself on the left side. So ever since then, I've been playing on the right side. But I can play both, and I like to characterize myself as like I don't like to assimilate myself with this person, but Juan LeBron, I love his style of play. I'm not a big fan of his attitude and the way he acts on the court, but he's a right side player. He's a very aggressive right side player, and that's kind of how I see myself as well, as because I have that left side experience. I could be very aggressive, but I play on the right side.
Well, you never, of course, with your age, you have that twitch nerve going on. You have the size, and that allows you to pop, get that sort of quick reaction snap when you're
Hmm.
hitting. How would you describe the difference between left and right then? I mean, it seems like at some level, the modern game is that, you know, when you're going to Dineno and even Martita in the women's, the strength of the right player is no longer just, you know, pushing it back and controlling.
Agreed, 100%. This new era of paddle is way more aggressive. You look at Tapia and Coelho, you look at what was LeBron and Galan. I mean, now they're hitting a lob and charging forward, hitting a chiquita and charging forward. So it is no more of this kind of stay back, stay patient, work the points. I mean, they don't get me wrong, they still do that every once in a while, but it's way more aggressive. Um, so thankfully slash unthankfully, my tennis background kind of plays a big advantage into that. I'm comfortable kind of rushing forward. I can stay back and work the point and play defense, use the wall. The wall is now my friend. But when I first started out, it wasn't. But I think having that tennis advantage allows me to be able to push forward easier and faster and kind of adapt to this new modern game style versus kind of the old game style of just staying back and waiting and lobbing and lobbing and waiting your turn until you can come in. And then you kind of walk forward, and then we're at the net, you're at the baseline, and playing a little bit slower.
Mm. Well, it's for sure that that's the pro game. I think it's important to highlight for those of us who
Hmm.
are not pros. There is still a thing called the slow game and using the wall and popping up lobs. The pro game at the men's level is not something that's reproducible for the mere mortals that are just you know, like old folks like myself anyway. But in terms of when you play left or right, you know, sometimes I have to play with a player and he says, can you, when we serve, we have to play the tennis formation as opposed to the I formation,
Hmm.
you know, at least the paddle formation. And so you have to switch. And so I'm always battling through the tactical shots you need to make differently. How do you describe the difference between playing left and playing right since you're able to play both?
Playing playing left, I think the biggest difference versus playing right to me is just having the mindset that you're going to be taking more shots on the left. You're going to be moving a little bit more because if that lob comes up the middle, that left side player, they have their over their forehand in the middle, so they're
Assuming they're
responsible for.
right-handed. Mhm.
Correct. Assuming you have two righties, then that person's responsible for coming over and covering the middle. For the higher level, for the pro level, I think people understand the rules fairly well. Even at kind of the lower level, though, I do see a lot of my students struggle because maybe somebody's used to playing on the left, but they switch. So then when they play that tennis style, like you're talking about, they'll go on the right side because their partner's serving, and that ball goes up in the middle, and they're used to taking that middle ball, but now they're coming over and hitting a backhand. So it can be tricky, but I also understand that as you get older, it's harder to move. So maybe playing the I formation paddle style is tougher and you can't cover as much court.
Mm.
I think as the teaching pro, whoever the teaching pro is, you just got to make your students aware of who's responsible for covering that middle when it gets lobbed. And if you're switching, you got to be a little bit more hyper focused on what your role is based upon what side you're on.
Mm. Totally. I love it. Thank you for that, Nico. I like it. What about choosing a partner? So you've been playing with Luis, who has Estrada, who's been on my show
Mhm.
already for a couple of years. When you look at all the pros, there seems to be like mad dating matches and switching so regularly. But the truth is, finding the right partner is a super important part of it. What kind of advice do you have? How do you figure out whether this is the right mate for you on the court?
I think that from almost like 5 minutes into playing with a new partner, you'll know if you have good chemistry on the court. I think, yes, you need to have a partner with good level, but I think almost what's more important than a high level is having really good chemistry on the court. I've played with some for fun matches, whatever, but I played with some higher level people than myself and then Luis, but I can tell that that individual and I just don't have the same chemistry that Luis and I have. So I would almost rather play with somebody a little bit maybe lower level, but have really good chemistry with. I know exactly what he's going to do. Yes, Luis and I have been playing for 2 years, but almost from the first time we played, I had that feeling that I knew exactly what he was going to do on the court. He knew when I was going to move. He knew where I was going to go. So for me, that's more valuable than having maybe like a 5% better play rates, play level. If you and then I feel like you can feel that fairly quickly when you're playing with somebody. I get that feeling. If I'm playing with somebody new and I can tell right away, we're not really in sync. I don't have the best chemistry with this person. So maybe
What
not everybody can tell right away, but I can tell
what
pretty
about off the court chemistry? Because I think it's very intriguing to think of the complementarity on a court. The thwacker on the left, the control guy on the right. Let's go that way. But then in the chemistry, you have different call systems and you have different personalities on the court. What about
quick.
chemistry off the court?
I definitely think that's important too because you're traveling to tournaments, you're going wherever, you're spending not only a lot of time, 2 or 3 hours on court with this person, you're probably going to be spending a lot of time with them off the court. So if your off the court chemistry isn't very good, I even think that's going to bleed onto the court. Where if you're not hanging around, if you don't like to be around that person off the court, when you get on the court, I bet you the chemistry is not nearly as good as it could be or should be. So I think that off court chemistry is even very important as well. If you're good friends with them, you can enjoy spending time with them. Then on the court's just going to be that much easier.
I mean, I interviewed on my podcast because I have another podcast about leadership, and I often interview people from professional sports, many others like rugby or cricket or whatever. And this idea of being a pro, well, you're a professional, just shape up and do the business. But I do believe that personal element, that the emotions, the reality of our situation. I had a fight with my girlfriend or whatever, it bleeds onto the court. And therefore, like your relations, the way you are off the court has to have an impact on the court.
hmm It's on that point, you need to have a be able to have an open line of communication with your partner as well. So if your partner had a fight with their girlfriend or wife, they need to be okay with me sitting down with them saying, "Hey, look, I know this happened off the court for 2 hours. Let's focus right here and now just on paddle. Let's forget about that for 2 hours. This is our escape. Let's focus up." And then my partner needs to be okay with me telling them that. Or if I say, hey man, I see that you're really struggling with this shot today. Maybe after this tournament, like you need to work on that. Or maybe my partner comes to me and says, hey Nico, I see that your fitness is lacking a little bit. I think you need to get in the gym a little bit more. I can't take that personally. He wants what's best for the team. I want what's best for the team. So if that's kind of his observation, I need to take that with an open mind and say, look, that's going to make us this much better. I don't need to take it personally and say, oh no, rah, 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 and just get upset. Like that open line of communication needs to be there.
That's a brilliant point. And what about the calls? Because my observation, and I spoke with Luis about this, and I mean, so many times when I'm playing in an Anglo-Saxon world, the idea of calling where the opponents are, they're up, they're coming back, they're rushing, it's almost like it has troubles coming out of the mouth to communicate what's going on. They're so set on they're watching you hit the shot as opposed to telling them where the opposite opponents are. What about the communication style that you have with Luis, and what type of calling mechanics have you been working on improving in the way you play?
Um, I mean, kind of just what you said, like if he's hitting the ball, like I'm not looking back at my partner. I'm looking straight forward at the opponents and I'm calling exactly what they're doing. He and I use a system where we don't say like left back or right back, or I just say like if the person in front of him, the person parallel to him, I'll say you, meaning you back.
Yours is back.
Correct. Or yours is in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the person in front of me, my down the line person, I say me. So I'm back. I'm in. Because we play so many different people. For me to in the moment try to remember names. Hey, Will's back, and who's his partner?
Oh,
There's
yeah,
just
by
not enough
then,
time
yeah, of course.
before I know it, the point's over and the set's over.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to keep it simple, and you're back, I'm back, both in. Keep it very short, very simple, so the communication part is easy, and we're not having to sit there and think.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, so I speak just a little bit of Spanish. I'm improving my Spanish, but one of the things I do is I try to talk in Spanish on the court as well. Um, and
Makes you
I've
feel
got
more paddle. It makes you feel more paddle, right? I think
exactly,
anyway.
exactly.
Vamos
So
arriba.
yeah,
Nada, nada,
atrás,
nada.
atrás, acá, los dos
Eso,
acá.
eso. Exactly. Beautiful. All right. Well, that's good. That's good stuff. What about you've been playing now for 7 years, and paddle. This is the joy of paddle. What is the funniest thing that's happened to you around paddle, on the paddle court, off the court?
Funniest thing. Um, Maybe that story I told about losing the two 15-year-olds.
Nice.
I mean, it happened a long, long time ago, but it's a great story, and I tell almost everybody that story because people that I'm introducing into the sport, especially the tennis players, they want to play tennis on the court. So I tell them that story. I go, look, I mean, you can play tennis on the paddle court, but that's only going to bring you up to a certain level. At some point, you're going to reach players that are good enough where they're able to counter your tennis game, and then you're going to lose the two 15-year-olds, and then you're going to feel like even more crap.
Well, it does remind me of a conversation I had with an amazing squash coach from Trinity College, the Paul Asante, who had a 252 match winning streak. So he knew
Mm.
something about winning. And the question I had for him was, to what extent your strengths should be highlighted or your weaknesses need to be improved. And in this case, the lesson learned is from defeat. There's obviously more lessons learned in defeat, but sometimes it can be lessons learned in victory. Where do you fall on how to improve Nico Agritelley?
Um, I think I would say more on the defeat side for sure. The matches you win, like I think you can still learn. Luis and I try to record usually the semis on if we make it there. Um, and we go back and we watch a lot of matches of our matches, and we'll sit there and we'll kind of dissect it. Like, oh, okay, did you see what he did there? He hit that, and then they like developing patterns. See, okay, that's their pattern. This team, they like to do this. Okay, great. And then notice some of our patterns as well. Oh, hey, when they get lobbed, when they do the fast lob down the middle, where Luis, you got to go over and take the bandeja in the middle. You usually hit it here. We're in this position. So that's not necessarily defeat or victory, but that's a good way we've improved a lot, especially because he's in Orlando and I'm in Texas, where we don't get to train together. I definitely think the defeats, though, because they hurt more. Usually you see something where you're exposed, where somebody found some sort of pattern that got you uncomfortable. So for us, even though it hurt, that's where we usually learn the most. The victories help too, because we see, oh, hey, we were doing this pattern and we were getting success. So both sides, but I think the defeats usually end up providing more value, more insight than the victories do.
It's one of the most fascinating things I think of paddle versus tennis, especially men's doubles, is that you do have more time for more sequences and patterns. I mean, men's doubles tennis is bada bing, bada boom, basically. I mean, occasionally there are long rallies, but in paddle, it's more frequent that you see these patterns developing. And I was wondering about your experience working and playing against the top in the world. What is the difference? What's it going to be? What's it going to be for you, an American, to get into, let's say, the top 20 in the world? How is that route going to happen?
Um, Unfortunately, that route is not going to happen for me here in the US. If Luis and I wanted to get into the top 20, we would need to move to Spain. Us spending that month in January in Spain was huge because we got to compete at that level every single day. And I noticed a huge jump in my game and Luis's game, not only from training with those guys, but playing matches every single day at that level. And we just don't have that level here yet in the US. Hopefully it'll come. I mean, we have Peter Alonso, who was top 20 in the world, moved here a couple of years ago. Juan Martin Diaz, he's an absolute legend for the sport, just moved to
Okay.
Miami as well. So you're having some of these guys that have retired move over to the US. So I think they're kind of paving a pathway for maybe in the future some of these other top guys, if they're still playing, to come over to the US and live here, potentially train here and whatnot. Right now, though, we just don't have the level. So for us, that's the big difference maker, is playing at that level every single day, day after day, and just getting used to the speed. The speed is so much faster. If I sit the ball up 3 or 4 inches too high at that level, points over. Here in the US, where we get away with a couple of mistakes here and there, where we don't get punished.
Mm.
And that's the big difference maker, is shot tolerance, consistency, how effective are your shots.
It does sound like we need a sort of a Messi effect, as in, the Lionel Messi coming over. We need, when Galan retires and such.
Mhm.
That might be it. And for me, last sort of question, Nico, is around off the court. What has paddle brought to you differently from the other sports that you played? What life lesson has paddle brought to Nico Agritelley?
Um, I mean, it's brought me joy for sure, but like growing up playing tennis, like I loved tennis in high school. I liked it in college, but it got to a point where I was really sick of tennis. Like by junior year of college, I realized I didn't want to go pro. I didn't want to live that lifestyle. I was kind of getting bored of tennis, but I love competing. So for me, discovering paddle right out of college I was really lucky because I was able to compete at something I was decent at to start, and I was able to enjoy that learning curve. I'm able to get better, which is something that it's kind of like a drug. You just get addicted to. With tennis, I peaked in college, training every day, 3 hour practices, 5 a.m. gym sessions. I mean, and I'd played for 17, 18, 20 years at that time. So I was at the top of my game. The only way I was going to get better was to go pro. And even then, your improvements are minuscule. Where with this sport, I mean, I look back last year and I'm loads better this year than I was last year. I look back 2 years ago and I'm better a year ago than I was 2 years ago. And day by day, you don't really see the improvements. You're kind of like, oh, okay, yeah. But if you look back at the bigger scope a year ago, I'm way better now than I was a year ago. I bet you if I look back in 25, I'm going to be way better in 25 than I was in 24. So for
Mm.
me, that's that learning curve, that growth curve is something that I love looking back and seeing, enjoying. Also, I've got to travel the world, where I never would have been able to do this with tennis. I've been to Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Colombia, Qatar, Italy, all over the US, Canada, Mexico. So for me, that's an amazing experience too. And I get to do it with one of my really good friends, with Luis. So
That's beautiful. It
couldn't
sounds a
ask.
little similar to a fun chap, a friend who was on the show recently, Danny Windahl from Sweden. He had the same sort of feeling about tennis. It was burned out and no more learning. And here you go, the excitement, and you're still a young man that can have so much more potential. So it's awfully exciting. I did want to ask one last question, which is about the PPL, because we didn't speak about that. You played for the Matrix a little bit, and now you represent the New York Atlantics. Tell us about your experience in the PPL, and what do you think of the prospects are for PPL and paddle in the United States?
So a lot to unpack, but I love the PPL. Last year we had the first year was in Zephyr Hills. It was just 5 weeks, so I got to spend all 5 weeks in Zephyr Hills competing for the Arkansas Matrix. I'm very lucky that my job gives me complete flexibility, so I was able to just pack up my stuff and go and train in Zephyr Hills, play in Zephyr Hills for 5 weeks. I had an incredible experience. I played almost every single match. Actually, at the end of the year too, I was awarded the MVP for the men of the entire
Nice.
league.
Wow.
Had an awesome experience. We lost in the semis, the Matrix. Fast forward to this year, I make a switch teams. Now I'm on the New York Atlantics. Last year, the rule was every team could have 2 internationals. This year, they have a rule you can have 8 internationals. So all these teams are bringing these major firepower. Tapia came, Ari Sanchez came, Sanyo came. We had
Marta.
Campagnolo, we had Rami Moyano, we had Icardo, we had Virginia, we had Andrea Ustero. We have Chingoto and Paquito on the team. They didn't come to this first event, but they're going to come to LA. So you have this major firepower now in the PPL. So for somebody like myself, I played almost every single match last year. I got the MVP. And then for me not to play this year, I mean, it really shows the increase in level. And it's kind of a catch-22 because I want the league to grow. I want the league to succeed. So for the league to succeed, I think they needed to make this change. Viewership last year was probably small. Attendance was very, very small. So how are they going to increase viewership? How are they going to increase attendance? The US market doesn't really know what this sport is. So if you're trying to shove a square hole in a circle peg, I mean, you can try for so long, but it's still not going to fit. So I think this move of making 8 internationals per team was a good move. Let's grow the league. Let's make it bigger and bigger, get more awareness behind it. And then eventually, maybe some Americans see that, oh, hey, there is some potential to play professional paddle and make a decent living and do okay with it. Okay. Now we can start to foster the American side of building more infrastructure, having more coaches, so on and so forth. But my experience this year was amazing. I got to spend 2 weeks with Campagnolo, Ramiro, Ricardo, Andrea. I mean, the team was awesome. Everything was
Virginia.
great. Watching these guys, Virginia, watching everybody play was so cool. So
Yeah,
I
it's
think
it
the
is
PPL
pretty
is on the right track.
amazing, right? When you watch their quality of play, and then you get to play the mixed doubles as well. I think that's wonderful. It's been great having you on, Nico. I love your energy. It's great to hear your passion, enthusiasm for the sport, and certainly I hope, as I said to Luis, that one day I'll get over there and you'll show me how to hit a better shot. Keep me alive, because that's one of the things that keeps me going. In your own words, Luis, what's a last word would you say for paddle in America?
Try it, play it. Everybody I bring out to try the sport absolutely loves it. The biggest thing holding people behind is not having access to courts, not having access to coaches. Find a court. I don't care if you got to drive an hour and a half or you have to make a vacation to fly to Texas or fly to Miami. Do it. You're going to
Look
play
you
it. You're going to love it.
They'll look you up in Dallas. Nico, muchas gracias. Era un placer. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a ti.